Il lievito madre.
Sourdough. What we're going to make today together is not only seeing the procedures that we need to follow to make sourdough if we wanted to make it on our own in our laboratory or in any other structure that needs to prepare sourdough. We will notice that the making of it is very peculiar. So keeping sourdough alive is a quite tough work that needs care and attention. So we'll try to understand not only how to make it, but also we'll also understand whether to keep our sourdough in our pastry laboratory or pastry shop will be something that we can keep up with. We'll try to understand why we're choosing one product compared to another. We never do things because we heard, for example, a product made with sourdough is better than any other yeast. It's important to understand what the main differences we have between sourdough and other products which activate the same processes. What we're going to use is we need a strong flour, W around 300, 320. We're going to use a starter because we will tend to create and reproduce a proliferation of our yeasts that we are catching from the air, giving them a sort of starter. We're going to use raisins that must be soaked in water, but before you soak them, rinse them with water at 40 degrees at least 3 to 4 times, because grapes tend to have some impurities, some paraffins in their external layers, so rinsing them with water at 40 degrees allows us to cleanse them thoroughly. Then the raisins must soak for at least 1 hour to improve the next phase, which will be the mixing phase. We will blend it, sift it, so only the liquid that remains is going to be used in the making of our sourdough, and water. We will directly knead in the machine during the kneading phase, but also in this moment part of the microorganisms, the yeasts, will start entering inside and will start contaminating our sourdough, and we will benefit of this thanks to their vital cycle. So we're taking our powders. Always remember to sift the flours more than once because it allows us to oxygenate the flour nicely and dry it. And surely sifting makes the enzyme activate better. So we're inserting the flour. So we are starting the machine only with the flour because air coming in brings some benefits that are very important for our preparation. So medium to low speed. We don't need a movement that's too harsh. Now we're going to take our raisins. I'm going to strain it a little bit. We're going to put it in our immersion blender. We will add a drop of water to let the blending take place. We just need a little bit of water to make it easier to blend. Slightly put a little less water compared to the volume of the raisins. Keep mixing. Perfect. Now, always checking that the flour is at the right speed, is stirring at the right speed. Now we're going to sift the raisins. To only take the internal part, the one we need. In the mixture we will make, remember that we will be adding something very similar to a liquid, so based on the total of the weight of the water you have, weigh out how much puree of raisins you're inserting and remove that amount of water from the recipe. If you want to accelerate this process, so if we want to accelerate the vital cycle of our microorganisms, I advise you to also add a small part of honey, just 1 teaspoon. We're going to directly add it to our raisins. So we will put 2 starters. This is the most important part. So yeasts, as a feeding and metabolic process, feed on sugars. So this is a very good starter to let them, to help them in the first stage. Now I'm going to lift our machine and we're going to insert our mixture of raisins and honey in the water. Going to stir and insert. When you insert all of the liquids inside, like this, let the machine start always on low speed. The proteins of the flour, in this case, that are necessary especially in the main structure of leavened products, need to absorb water in a certain amount of time. So if we put all of the water together, this is a pre-dough anyways, but if we put the water all together and we have a speed that's quite high, we would overload the capacity of the proteins to keep the water we are giving it. We are giving them. Lifting the bowl to make sure that the machine gets to the bottom of it. So the flour that's at the side is going to be incorporated slowly so that we don't overload the whole product. Now we're going to work at this medium speed. Always remember that based on the movement of your machine, in this case we are using a normal planetary machine, the movement that this dough requires is a movement that mimics what a man or a human being would do. So if you have a machinery with arms, where the arms of the machine create this type of movement, it is better because the movement is similar to a human movement. With this type of machine we need to work at a higher speed to be able to get the same mechanical phase. We realize that the sourdough with these proportions, so we must never forget that there are a lot of types of sourdough based on the type of hydration we give it, with the balance we have in our books and that you have. When the dough starts cleaning the external part of the bowl and starts sticking to the hook, these are the two indicators that make us understand that we're getting towards the final point. Another important thing is seeing the structure of the dough. We can also especially see that when the machine is turned off, when it is nice and smooth, and when I touch it, it doesn't, we have a nice resistance. And we have a sort of external film. It means that it's ready. So it cleans the machine, it sticks to the hook, it is smooth and does not have too much humidity. In the meantime, we're going to take a bowl. We're going to put some fat in it so that the dough does not stick to it. So when the dough will be ready, we're going to put it in the fridge. As we're talking, I start greasing my bowl. You can use lard, you can use an oil, but it must be a light colored seed oil, something that doesn't have too much flavor. So we're going to put it on a bowl, cover it with some plastic film, and when you put plastic it mustn't be put in a very sealing way because we would generate a strong production of carbon dioxide that under pressure might let the film explode, so maybe poke some hole on the surface of the foil. Then we'll go in the fridge for at 3 degrees for 24 hours. Our sourdough is ready. Clearly checking that it is ready. Making some room. We're going to grease our hands a little bit. And we need this because in this way, when we work with our sourdough, the fat part that we will deposit on the external part will protect it from the formation of crusts. So we're going to very gently, see what I'm doing, very gently, because sourdough has just come from a very strong mechanical push, so the gluten is quite stressed, and we need to be careful not to overload its tension. So just take it, then I stop. See? Let's just close it. Every time I do this, I always stop. I'm giving it just some rest. And then we're going to put it in our bowl. So we put our sourdough in our bowl, and then we're going to cover it with plastic film. It's just for the first day. Remember that the process that we will see remember to put the foil, plastic film on top only in the first day. So we're using a strong flour, sifted. We're going to use starter, so some honey, some malt. We can use some raisins, a very ripe fruit. We're going to blend it, and we're going to sift it. And we're going to put the starter, we're going to knead, and then close our dough, and we're going to put it in a covered with some plastic film. This must be done for 21 days. Every day we're going to refresh our sourdough to give our microorganism colony a new nourishment to keep the growth process. When we start from 0, we need to do this for at least 21 days. From the 21st day, we can start using the sourdough in the doughs that we need to make. And this is it with the first part about sourdough. Now we're going to start with the first refreshment of sourdough. We will need to do this for at least 21 days. Usually, many people prefer to refresh every 2 days, but when we have to make a sourdough from the beginning, I always advise you to do it every day to bring the product after 1 month to be ready to be put in doughs. So, after the first day, we're going to take our sourdough out of the container. You can also put it in a very tight cloth to limit the fermentation activity. But since it was the first day and the majority of the colony still hasn't formed, we can also put it in a container, a glass jar even. For glass jars, remember to remove the sealing pressure element, that little circle. So, to remove our sourdough from the container, removing the crusts, as we've seen for biga 2. Once all of the crusts have been removed, we're going to weigh it out. And from there, we must make a proportion with water and flour. The water will be needed to rebalance the pH and make it neutral, and the flour will be needed to give new nourishment to our yeasts that have in the meantime consumed part of the carbohydrates in the dough we're seeing. So, removing the crusts. We are going to weigh it out. I'm going to put it in water to hydrate. We're going to sponge it in the water. When the mixture floats, we're going to use it. The proportions. When the sourdough that we cleaned and weighed out after the sponging, we're going to weigh the sourdough again, and we're going to use half of the weight of the sourdough of water and the same quantity of flour. So if we have 200 grams of sourdough, we're going to use, for the refreshment, 100 grams of flour and 100 grams of water. So let's take our flour, let's take our ready sourdough, we're going to tear it to pieces. I'm going to add some water. So 200 grams of sourdough, 200 grams of 100 grams of flour and 100 grams of water. So we're going to stir and then directly finish the operation on our working surface. Push the product to the sides to take everything that's in the bowl, stir it, turn it over, and then directly on the working surface. So also using our hands to catch everything. Do not overwork it because we're going to use a rolling pin, so we might stress the gluten too much. And we're going to do this. And we're going to roll our dough out. Avoid to add any flour, only if it's strictly necessary. We're going to fold it by 3. This is not something that must be done necessarily. We can also knead everything in the planetary machine, part of the flour and the water, and then close our sourdough directly in our container. We're doing this because it is a fresh sourdough that needs strength. So this type of work allows us to obtain more structure. We're doing this to improve to make it easier to roll out. We're going to add just a little bit of flour because it's difficult to work with. As I'm laying it out, I notice that the external part is becoming smoother and smoother and homogeneous. Again, fold to 3, a little bit more flour, so I advise you to do this. It's a lot more effective to give structure to our sourdough. Now we're going to roll it. Like this. We're going to make an incision, closing it, and placing it again in our container. Always remember that your container must be quite high to allow the sourdough to grow in the fridge. In the first moments of sourdough production we won't need a very big container, but as we go on we will need a bigger container. As I was telling you, if you use glass, always remove the pressure circle, or you can not put the tap, but put a linen cloth and seal it. For the first days we can always use some plastic film with some holes on it. And we have finished the first refreshment of sourdough. Remember that it must be done for at least 21 days, a little bit less than 1 month. It's continuous refreshments, so removing the crust, sponging, re-kneading. I'm going to make a few folds to strengthen the gluten mat, and then you can start using it in the doughs. And this is it for the sourdough.